Somewhere south of Isfahan, a chain of underground blasts tore through a mountain complex Iran had spent roughly 4 decades building into the rock. Not one flash and a puff of smoke on the surface, but a rolling series of secondary detonations across different points on the slope, minutes apart. Analysts who study bunker-busting weapons say that pattern usually means one thing: the weapon didn't stop at the entrance. It got inside, and whatever was stored there, fuel, equipment, processing gear, possibly enriched uranium stock, went up with it. That is the real, confirmed consequence here, and everything else in this story exists to explain how something built to be untouchable ended up touched. Start with a plain admission. Nobody outside Iran's own engineers knows with certainty what was inside that specific chamber when it detonated, and nobody outside a small circle of intelligence analysts can tell you with full confidence how much material survived. What's being reported is the visible signature, the sequence of blasts, the location, the type of facility, and the reasonable inference drawn from it. That's different from a confirmed kill count on a nuclear stockpile, and it's worth being honest about that gap up front, because a lot of the noise around this story blurs the two. So why did this happen now? And why does it matter that it happened at all? To answer that, you have to understand what Iran actually built underground, because it wasn't a bunker in the way most people picture a bunker. A box with a door. It was closer to a small industrial town carved into stone. Separate storage chambers, ventilation systems, access tunnels, multiple entry points spread across the mountainside so that no single strike could shut the whole thing down at once. That design wasn't improvised. It came out of decades of watching other countries' air forces fail to crack hardened targets and drawing the obvious lesson. Go deep enough, spread wide enough, and conventional weapons simply run out of reach. North Korea built its missile infrastructure on the same logic. Armed groups in Lebanon fortified command tunnels the same way. Dig deep, spread out, and bet that no adversary will spend the time, money, or precision hardware to chase down every possible entrance. For a long time, that bet paid off. It's worth remembering that Iran's nuclear infrastructure was never built around one site. It's a network, and each piece plays a different role. The Natanz complex, partly underground, has been the public face of Iran's enrichment program for years. Fordow goes further. Built directly into a mountain near the city of Qom, designed specifically after the world already knew about Natanz, meaning it was harder to find and harder to hit from the start. And then there's the complex near Isfahan, which handles material processing and storage at a scale that many independent analysts consider among the largest nuclear-linked sites in the country. 3 sites, 3 different roles, 3 different depths, all built on the same underlying bet: that no single strike, however powerful, could take out the whole network at once. That's the architecture now being picked apart piece by piece, and the bet is not holding the way it used to. The reason traces back to one weapon most people had never heard of before this month: the GBU-72, officially an Advanced 5 000 pound penetrator. It isn't experimental. It's been in service for a few years, but it fills a gap that had sat open for a long time. At the top end of the bunker buster scale sits the GBU-57, a massive ordnance penetrator so heavy, over 30,000 pounds, that only the B-2 stealth bomber can carry it. That's built for the hardest targets on the planet, buried under real mountains with layered reinforcement. At the other end sit 2 000 pound class weapons, reliable workhorses but never designed to punch through both extreme depth and extreme reinforcement at once. For years, there was a wide gap between those two extremes, a gap Iran's underground strategy was built to exploit. The GBU-72 sits inside that gap. It gives commanders a weapon that can seriously threaten hardened underground targets without needing a B-2 flown in from the other side of the world every single time. That distinction matters more than it sounds. A B-2 mission means enormous fuel costs, long flight times, and limited availability, since there simply aren't many of those aircraft in the world. Relying only on B-2S to hit every underground target would make a sustained campaign logistically almost impossible. The GBU-72 can be carried by fighter jets already stationed in the region, which means strikes can happen faster, more often, and with far less lead time. That one design change closes exactly the strategic gap Iran spent decades planning around. What actually lets this weapon do what it does comes down to a fairly simple combination of physics and engineering. A standard bomb hits the surface and loses most of its energy right there, cratering the ground and damaging whatever sits above it. A true penetrator is built completely differently. Its casing is a dense, hardened shell, almost like a solid steel rod, engineered specifically so it doesn't deform or break apart on impact with rock or concrete at extreme speed. Inside that casing sits a fuse that doesn't trigger on impact. It waits, counting as the weapon punches downward through layer after layer of material, and only detonates once it reaches a depth programmed in beforehand. Reporting on this weapon class puts its penetration at roughly 100 feet of earth, or more than 20 feet of reinforced concrete, before the warhead fires. 20 feet of reinforced concrete isn't a wall. It's closer to a fortress designed to shrug off exactly this kind of attack and keep functioning. That's the detail that changes everything for a site like the one near Isfahan. Iran's entire underground strategy rested on the assumption that depth itself would be the shield, that no air campaign could ever reach far enough to matter. This weapon doesn't disprove that assumption so much as ignore it. It doesn't blast through the mountain from outside the way older weapons might. It behaves as if the mountain were never an obstacle at all, detonating precisely where the engineers who built the place assumed nothing could ever arrive. The guidance system behind it is worth understanding too, because it explains the precision. The GBU-72 can fly on GPS coordinates programmed before takeoff based on the latest intelligence about a target's exact location, but it can also be steered in real time with laser targeting. Someone in the aircraft actively tracking the target as the weapon falls, making corrections along the way. Here's the part that matters operationally. If that laser guidance gets interrupted by smoke, cloud cover, or the aircraft having to maneuver because of a threat, the weapon doesn't just go dumb. It automatically reverts to the last confirmed GPS position and keeps flying toward the target using that data. That kind of built-in redundancy isn't designed for a clean test range. It's designed for real combat, where something is always going wrong, and the weapon still has to land where it's supposed to. None of this technology appeared out of nowhere. Its lineage traces back to the Gulf War, when American forces urgently needed something that could crack hardened Iraqi command bunkers that nothing else in the arsenal could touch. That original design was refined over the years and used again against underground facilities tied to armed groups operating out of Beirut. The GBU-72 is simply the newest link in that same chain. Modern GPS guidance, reinforced tail fins for stability and accuracy, and a casing built to survive impact with solid rock without breaking apart. Every generation of this weapon exists because every generation of underground defense gets deeper and more elaborate in response. It's been a decades-long back and forth between those who dig and those who build the tools to reach them. Right now, the advantage sits with the side building the tools. This also isn't the first time this particular weapon has shown up in this conflict. It was reportedly used earlier along Iran's coastline near the Strait of Hormuz, against hardened positions believed to house coastal defense systems and anti-ship missile batteries. The exact kind of weaponry Iran had positioned specifically to threaten shipping through the strait. What's happening now isn't a surprising standalone event. It reads as a continuation of the same pattern, the same weapon, the same operational approach, just redirected toward a new set of targets as a broader campaign works methodically through Iran's capabilities. Coastal defenses first, then anti-ship weapons, and now the deeper infrastructure tied directly to uranium enrichment. Now, why fighter jets instead of heavy bombers for most of this work? The aircraft most often tied to these particular strikes is a two-seat, twin-engine fighter capable of carrying serious ordnance while staying fast and maneuverable enough to defend itself if something goes wrong mid-mission. But the real reason it keeps getting chosen comes down to something simpler: response time. When intelligence confirms a high-value target buried deep underground, commanders don't have the luxury of waiting. There's no time to scramble a heavy bomber from a base thousands of miles away and burn hours just getting into position. If fighter jets carrying this weapon are already stationed in the region, and they are, a strike package can be airborne within roughly 30 minutes to an hour of a target being confirmed, deliver a precision hit, and be back on the ground before the other side has fully processed what happened. That speed is the entire tactical advantage. Move fast, strike precisely, leave before anyone can organize a response. Here's a piece of this story that rarely gets mentioned: verification. For years, international inspectors have struggled to track exactly how much enriched uranium Iran actually holds, where it's stored, and how pure it is. That was already difficult before any of these strikes, given Iran's long history of limiting inspector access and moving material between sites. Now imagine trying to do that job in the middle of an active bombing campaign, with facilities being hit, tunnels collapsing, and material potentially being relocated before anyone outside Iran even learns a strike occurred. That uncertainty cuts in every direction. It means the outside world can't say with full confidence how much damage was actually done to Iran's stockpile. It also means Iran itself may struggle to prove, one way or another, what survived and what didn't. Strangely, that uncertainty becomes its own form of pressure, because no one, not outside analysts, not foreign officials, and arguably not even Iran's own leadership, can say with total confidence what's actually still down there. Which raises a fair question worth sitting with for a second. If you were advising a government whose entire deterrent rested on materials nobody could verify the location of anymore, what would you actually tell them to do next? Dig deeper? Come to the table? There isn't an obviously right answer, and that's part of why this keeps dragging on. Look at what Iranian officials are actually saying in public, because the gap between the rhetoric and the situation on the ground tells you a lot about what's happening internally. Officials have called the strikes reckless acts that will reshape the region in ways the attackers will regret and have promised the country will emerge stronger. That's a message aimed outward. But look at what's actually being hit. Not random sites, but the exact facilities where enriched material and processing equipment have been protected by decades of investment and engineering. That's not damage to buildings. That's a direct strike on the core of Iran's negotiating leverage. Every facility taken offline isn't just an infrastructure loss. It's a piece removed from the board that Iran was counting on to walk away from this with its position intact. At the same time, Iran's navy declared the Strait of Hormuz effectively closed to shipping, warning that any vessel attempting passage would become a target. A serious claim, given that roughly a fifth of the world's oil moves through that narrow waterway. Here's what actually happened when that threat was tested. Iranian forces reportedly launched attack drones under cover of darkness at a commercial tanker transiting the strait. American naval and air defense systems already positioned and watching for exactly that scenario intercepted both drones before they got close to the ship. The tanker continued on, undamaged. One of hundreds of commercial vessels that pass through the strait on any given day, all of them under active protection. Officials overseeing regional operations have publicly confirmed that commercial shipping continues to move safely through waters Iran claims are closed. That gap between the announcement and the reality matters. A blockade only works if it actually stops ships or scares shipping companies into rerouting. When hundreds of vessels keep moving safely every day, the psychological weight of that threat starts to erode. Insurance underwriters and shipping firms pay far more attention to what's actually happening on the water than to what's said in a statement. And what's happening on the water is continuous, protected passage. Behind all of this sits a broader economic picture that rarely makes the headlines. Every time tension near the strait spikes, energy markets brace for a shock, because a significant share of the world's oil and gas supply depends on that one narrow passage staying open. Analysts watch maritime insurance rates closely as an early warning signal. When underwriters start raising prices, that's usually the tell that real danger is building. So far, despite the drone attack and the closure announcement, that kind of dramatic market panic hasn't materialized, largely because in practice, the strait has stayed functionally open. That itself says something. Markets respond to outcomes, not just statements, and the outcome day after day has been ships moving safely rather than ships getting hit. That tells you something about how both sides have chosen to fight this. Right now, Iran is leaning on drone strikes and sharp public statements rather than direct, large-scale confrontation with American naval forces, almost certainly because its military leadership understands exactly how lopsided that kind of direct clash would be. The response on the other side has stayed defensive and restrained, focused on intercepting threats and protecting shipping lanes rather than a broader offensive against Iran's navy. Both sides appear to be signaling rather than trying to trigger an escalation neither one currently wants. It's a fragile balance, and it wouldn't take much to break it. One drone or missile that actually connects with a ship instead of getting intercepted could change the picture within minutes. For now, though, both sides seem to be walking that line carefully. Where this gets genuinely tangled is the diplomacy, and honestly, that confusion might be the most revealing part of the whole story. At one point, word went public that a deal was close, that terms had reportedly been agreed at a senior level within the Iranian government, and that formal steps were expected soon. Hours later, other Iranian officials pushed back hard, insisting nothing had actually been finalized or signed. On the surface, that looks like a simple mix-up, or even dishonesty. Look closer and it reads as something more significant. A real split inside Iran's leadership. Some factions clearly want a way out of this, even at real cost. Others either aren't ready to admit that publicly, or genuinely weren't looped in on how far the talks had actually progressed. When different parts of the same government contradict each other publicly over whether an agreement even exists, that's not how a confident, unified leadership behaves. That's what it looks like when a government is under enough pressure that its internal structure starts visibly cracking. There have also been public accusations aimed at Iran over leaked versions of the negotiating terms that reportedly didn't match what was actually discussed at the table, distorted or incomplete accounts making their way into the press. Alongside that came direct criticism describing that kind of behavior as corrosive to trust, paired with a clear message that further attacks like the drone strike on the tanker would be considered completely unacceptable, and that Iran would need to get control of both its internal messaging and its external actions if it wants any agreement to hold. Whatever you make of how this usually gets covered, it's worth stepping back from the headlines and looking at what's actually happening on the operational level. Commercial ships are moving safely through waters that were supposedly closed. Drone attacks are being intercepted before they cause harm. Underground facilities that were considered untouchable for decades are being reached and taken offline. That's the situation on the ground, regardless of how any single article frames it. Now think about where this is physically happening, because the geography explains a lot about the strategy underneath it. Isfahan sits on Iran's central plateau, well inland, with the Persian Gulf to the south. Zoom into satellite imagery on the outskirts of the city, and you won't find one isolated bunker sitting in the landscape. You'll find something closer to an entire underground industrial zone built directly into a mountainside, expanded in stages over many years. Earlier satellite imagery shows how a site like this develops over time. Separate storage chambers, access roads built specifically to move vehicles to tunnel entrances, multiple points where the mountain has been hollowed out to house processing equipment, and material at depths long considered out of reach for conventional airstrikes. What stands out about entrances to facilities like this is how ordinary they're built to look. They're clearly reinforced, but deliberately unremarkable from the outside, blending into terrain that reads as an average desert hillside unless you already know exactly where to look. That's not an accident. It's the entire point. Multiple entrances mean multiple ways in and out, letting material move deeper into the mountain for storage and then back out for use, all before an outside strike can catch it at a vulnerable moment. Spread the target wide enough, and no single strike, however powerful, can shut down the whole operation at once. That same logic creates an obvious next move for Iran, building decoy structures near the real ones, sites engineered specifically to look convincing from orbit, designed to lure expensive precision weapons into empty holes in the ground instead of active facilities. That's exactly why the intelligence and surveillance work behind these strikes matters as much as the weapon itself. A bomb, however advanced, is only as good as the information telling it where to go. What's playing out right now is a methodical dismantling of a decades-old underground strategy, pairing accurate targeting information with a weapon finally capable of reaching depths once considered completely safe. And that combination doesn't get discussed nearly enough. Nobody approaches a target like this carelessly. Reports put the number of separate bunker strikes in this area at roughly 20 so far, using a mix of munitions carried by both heavy bombers and fighter jets equipped with different penetrating weapons. And yet there have been reports of equipment being moved back into these sites shortly after a strike, sometimes within a day. Why does that keep happening after so many hits? Because the true depth of these facilities significantly exceeds what earlier generations of weapons could reliably reach. Damaging an entrance or a shallow storage chamber isn't the same as neutralizing whatever sits much deeper inside. Closing that exact gap is the whole reason a weapon like the GBU-72 was developed in the first place. Step back and look at how this entire campaign has unfolded, and a pattern starts to emerge. The earliest strikes focused on radar systems and communications networks, effectively stripping Iran's ability to detect and coordinate attacks. The next phase moved to command and control centers, cutting the link between decision makers and forces in the field. Now the campaign has shifted directly to enrichment and storage infrastructure. The exact capabilities Iran assumed would stay protected no matter what else happened. That's not a random sequence. It reads like a campaign built around a clear end goal, systematically removing options in whatever order is most likely to force a decision, whether that decision comes from military exhaustion, internal political division, or simply running out of leverage to hold on to. Which brings up the real question underneath all of this. What does Iran actually want out of this situation, and what is the other side actually trying to achieve? For Iran, it likely comes down to preserving enough to rebuild and holding on to as much enrichment capacity as possible in whatever final agreement eventually gets signed. Iran clearly understands the hardest line being drawn runs straight through the nuclear program itself. Whether it ultimately gives up all of it, part of it, or manages to stretch this negotiation out as long as possible remains genuinely unclear. But underneath the public conversation about nuclear weapons sits a quieter, arguably more important fight over the enriched uranium stockpile itself. That stockpile functions as a kind of insurance policy for everything else Iran is trying to protect. Its broader military ambitions, its drone programs, its influence over shipping through the strait. All of it depends on having the necessary materials somewhere accessible. Take that material away, facility by facility, strike by strike, and everything else Iran is trying to hold on to becomes far more exposed. That's what's actually at stake in these bunker operations, which is why the campaign keeps hitting its targets instead of winding down. The apparent goal isn't to demonstrate military power for its own sake. It's to gradually strip away Iran's real leverage at the negotiating table. There's one more development worth mentioning, because it points toward where military strategy is heading well beyond this specific conflict. Legislative steps are underway to create a dedicated senior military command focused entirely on robotics and autonomous systems, positioned at the same organizational level as the regional command currently overseeing operations in this theater. That's a meaningful signal. Drones, unmanned vehicles, and AI-assisted systems are going to play an increasingly central role in how future conflicts unfold. Early signs of that are already showing up in this same campaign, including reports of an autonomous unmanned boat being used in a rescue operation to recover the crew of a downed helicopter. That detail is worth holding on to, because a dedicated command structure means resources, career paths, and doctrine will scale around this kind of technology, shaping how conflicts get fought for years to come. There's something almost personal in watching this play out from a distance. The way a family argument can drag on for years, with everyone insisting they want it resolved while nobody actually moves first. Maybe you've seen that dynamic somewhere closer to home. Two sides that both say they want peace, neither willing to be the one who blinks first. It's worth wondering whether that instinct, dig in, wait the other side out, ever actually works, or whether it just delays the same reckoning everyone already sees coming. So where does this actually stand right now? An active precision strike campaign is systematically dismantling infrastructure that took decades to build. At the same time, the diplomatic track is showing real signs of progress alongside real signs of internal division. That's not a contradiction. It's what pressure looks like from inside a government being forced to absorb continuous damage to its most protected assets. Some factions are pushing for a way out. Others aren't ready to say so publicly. In the middle of all of it, global shipping keeps moving through the Strait of Hormuz. Not because Iran is allowing it, but because it's being actively defended regardless of what gets announced publicly. Conflicts like this rarely end with one clean, dramatic moment. There's no single signature, no single surrender that neatly closes the book. They usually end the way this one is unfolding right now. Military action and diplomatic signals moving on separate tracks that don't always line up. Different voices inside the same government pulling in different directions depending on who's speaking and on what day. A strike one day, talk of a deal the next, then a different official denying that any deal exists at all. That contradiction doesn't necessarily mean the process is falling apart. It might just as easily mean it's working. That the pressure is real enough to split leadership between those ready to walk away and those not yet willing to say so out loud. Underground, Iran built something meant to outlast any air campaign directed against it, something meant to stay untouched no matter how long the pressure lasted. 4 decades of tunnels, layers of concrete, entrances hidden in plain sight. All of it built on the belief that no adversary would ever have both the tools and the will to reach that deep. That belief is now being tested directly, mountain by mountain, facility by facility, and so far the mountain isn't winning. The rock that was supposed to be the last line of defense turned out to be just another layer. One more obstacle that modern engineering has learned how to get through. That's the real story here. Not one explosion, not one weapon, but the slow, methodical unraveling of an idea that took 40 years to build, and, it turns out, only a handful of precision strikes to start coming apart. Where you land on how this ends probably depends on which part of that story sticks with you most.